Hey guys, and welcome back to part 2 of my Building Gunpla series. This is basically just a kind of tutorial series where I'm just going to show you how I go about building kits, and you can kind of take my advice or not. You can kind of make your own ways or whatever you want to do. I'm no expert, but at least I just want to show you guys kind of the way that I go about doing things. Thanks to those of you who watched part 1. In part 1 we covered just the grades of Gunpla and some of the terminology, and we talked about how to read the manual, how to wash and prepare your parts, and now we're finally ready to start cutting out some stuff and building the kit. So once again, just a reminder, we're building the high-grade Universal Century Yakudoga. Today we're going to be just covering how to cut out the parts properly, how to take care of your nub marks, and just general assembly of the kit. Alright, so we're ready to get started building. I've got all my parts there ready, all my runners are in alphabetical order. My polycaps are there, ready for easy access. I got my side cutters and my knife there, and I've got the instructions here, right up close so they're easy to see. Now the very first part that we're going to need is F3, so that means we're going to go to runner F and cut out part number 3. And we should also note that this is a ×2, so that means there's going to be 2 F runners and 2 F3 parts, so we need to get both of them. Alright, so here we've got runner F, and this is part number 3, so we're going to go ahead and cut this part out. Now, Master Kawaguchi, the real Master Kawaguchi, says that you should cut the part from below like this so you can see clearly what you're doing, but personally that's just much too uncomfortable for me. My wrist just doesn't really work that way, so I have to cut them from above. Now when you're cutting the part away from the runner, you don't want to cut right up against the part like so. You want to leave a little bit of a gap there, so there's a little bit of that gate still going to be connected to the part when we cut it off. So let's just go ahead and cut this here, and this one, and this one's on the end of a peg, so when there's a gate on the end of a peg like that, you can go ahead and just cut it close right up against there, because that's not going to be needed for anything. So here's our part. And of course there's a couple of nubs on there. They're on that side, they're on that side, and the one on the end of the peg there. So we're going to take our hobby knife and clear off these nubs a little bit more. Now when it comes to getting rid of nubs, this is probably the step that has the most different variations. Everyone does nubs differently. This is the way that I do it. You should just try to find the way that works best for you. But here's what I do. I just take the knife and I just cut it as close as possible here with my knife, like that, and you can see it's basically almost totally gone there already. And then I'm going to go to this side and just repeat the process. I hold my knife like this, like a pencil, and then just kind of, because the side of the blade is flat and this piece of plastic is flat, it's very easy to just bring that along there and just cut that nub very easily. Same thing for the bottom here, the edge is flat, so we can just easily just take that off pretty easily. If I can say easily a few more times. I've seen other people use the blade in different ways, cutting like this. That doesn't work for me. I mean, just hold it whatever works best for you. Now because this part is going to be going inside the kit, I know that this nub is never going to be seen. That is probably close enough for this. We really don't need to go ahead and make sure that we've got this nub any closer, but just for the sake of demonstration, here's where we're going to go ahead and use our sanding stick. Because this is flat and this part is flat, once again it's very easy. We're just going to put that on there, and it doesn't take much, just a couple little passes like that should be enough to take down any remaining nub that was on there. And as you can see, after each couple rubs with the sanding stick, I'm checking it. That's because you don't want to sand it too much, so you just want to sand it just enough to get rid of those nubs. And once again, this one's on the end of a peg, so we really don't need to worry about that too much. So this part's okay. Let's go to the other F runner, cut out the other F3 piece, because we are going to need 2 of them. For now we're done with the F runners, so we can stick them back in the box. Just like before, we're just going to go ahead and get rid of these nubs on here. And once again, just be very careful. You are working with a knife in very close proximity to your fingers, so inevitably you will get some cuts now and then. Just try to be careful, and if you do get cut, wash it and put a band-aid on it. If you're like me and don't like to put band-aids on your fingers, because personally when I have a band-aid on my finger I can't work on Gunpla because I need the sensitivity of my fingers to really hold the parts very well. If I've got a band-aid on there, I just can't hold it well. So what I'll do if I have a cut that won't stop bleeding, I'll just hold it with a paper towel long enough to get the bleeding to stop, and then I'll actually put some super glue on it. Most all super glues, now don't take my word for it, you should definitely check the glue before you do this, but most all super glue is perfectly fine for you to get onto a cut or something like that. So I'll just put a little super glue on there, wait like 10-15 seconds for it to dry, and then it'll be fine. The cut will be temporarily filled in and I can continue working. So anyway, we've got those two F3 pieces. We're also going to need PCJ. PC stands for polycap. So PCJ we can find here on the polycap sheet, and J is where I've got them upside down. Here we are. There's PCJ. And polycaps, you can cut with these, but I personally like to cut off polycaps with a knife just because the polycap material is much softer. Unless you have very, very sharp side cutters, you're not going to get as clean of a cut as if you just use the hobby knife. So I like to just lay this down on my mat and just cut that nice and cleanly. Like so. Then you don't really have much of any kind of nub on there. If it is a lot, go ahead and just try to clean it up a little bit. But if you're cutting with that method, just cutting it against the mat board like that, you should be able to get a pretty clean cut. So now according to the manual, we're just going to plug the polycap down into the piece like so. So we've got our piece and the polycap like that. Now does the polycap go this way with the hole facing like that, or that way? If you're not sure, just check the manual. Here we can see this piece should be facing that way, and the polycap should drop in like this. There, that's nice and firm in there, so that's gonna be good. Go ahead and repeat that. And that's basically it. Honestly guys, I'm gonna tell you right now, if you can do that, then you can build any Gunpla kit possible. Those are the most basic steps, all you need to do to build any sort of Gunpla kit. Now keep in mind, I am just talking building, just snap building. If you can do this with these two parts, then you can do that with a master grade, a high grade, a real grade, any sort of grade of kit. Granted, there are occasionally steps that are a little bit more complicated than that, but essentially it's the same method. So let's continue. The next part that we need is part C13 and polycap E. Here's runner C and part 13. Once again, cut it a little ways away from the part, leaving a little bit of gate on there. Now like I said before, what I do next is go at it with a hobby knife. What some people do is just cut it again with the side cutters. Like that. But as close as I can possibly get with the side cutters, there's still always going to be a little bit of a nub on there. Granted, these aren't the absolute best side cutters, they are very good, but with some really super good ones you can get that like really, really close. But ultimately, I think your best bet is just going to be using this method of cutting it closer with a knife, and then just taking a sanding stick and giving it just a little bit of sanding. Rub your finger over the nub just to make sure you don't feel anything. Also use your fingernail. If you can feel any resistance of the nub, then that means it's still there and it's going to show up when you paint it. But if you can't feel anything, then you're probably in the clear. Now as you can see, it doesn't say ×2 anywhere, but there are 2 lines here into 2 different positions. So that just means that you will have to use 2 of these poly caps just to make it look like the picture here. So you're going to have a one there and one there. Now I'm not going to bore you guys to death by showing you a step-by-step process of how to build every single individual part. So from here there's just a couple of the things I want to point out. Just a few things that you should be careful of while building your kits. One thing is, first you may come across a part like this, where as you can see this is just a handle piece, and there on the side is an extra little piece like this. Now, if we look at that step in the manual, you can see this part, and there is the shadow of that extra little piece and the picture of the nippers. That means that you are going to nip off that extra little piece. If you're ever unsure, just wait till you can see it in the manual, because sometimes there are little bits like that that are necessary, so just make sure whether you should cut it off or not before you cut it. Alright, a couple other things I want to show you are going to involve this shield piece, so I went ahead and cut this off. The first one being that if you can see this nub here on this side, when you've got a nub, which is usually a large nub like this, on the edge of a large flat piece, especially on shield pieces or large armor pieces, it's very easy to accidentally gouge out too much of that, or when you're cutting the nub to accidentally rip out a bit of the plastic. So these are areas where you have to really be extra careful. Just make sure you cut it really gently. Now, even with the blade, I'm going to cut it just a little bit off, not totally up against the plastic, because I don't want to accidentally gouge out too much. So as you can see, I'm just going over this a couple times, just taking off a little bit more, little by little, and switching back and forth so that I'm getting the nub actually from both sides. And there, once I've got it to a point where it's pretty much about all I can do with the knife without going into the part, then we'll come at it with the sandpaper or a sanding stick and sand it a bit. I can still feel it a little bit on there, so we're going to give it a little bit more. And there, now it's perfectly flat. The other thing that I want to point out that's going to be really hard, pretty much just impossible to see on camera, I think, is flash. Flash is something that you normally don't have to deal with a lot on most Bandai kits, because a lot of flash is basically the indicator of not good molding. And Bandai quality and their quality control is usually very good, so you usually never have to worry about flash on Bandai kits. But if you build any third-party kits, or occasionally you might run into some on a Bandai kit, so I just want to talk about that for a second. Flash is basically when the part is made and the mold, between the two molding pieces, sometimes a little bit of plastic gets out off to the sides. So usually on around the edge of a piece, you'll have just a little bit of a sharp point of plastic around here. This was the only part that I could really find any on, and like I said, it must be too hard to see on camera, which means it's very small, but here around the edge of this shield, there is a little bit of a sharp edge. Now it's really not too much of a problem, and sometimes you want the edge to be very sharp, but if you don't, if you're like me and you don't like to have any super sharp edges on stuff, then you can deal with that a couple different ways. Obviously, the easiest way will just be sanding it a little bit. Just something like that should be enough just to take off that little tiny sharp edge, and it was. Another way is you can use your knife, and a lot of people either like or don't like this technique. It's kind of lazy, so a lot of people don't like it, but you can use your knife and gently just kind of scrape that along the edge like that, and then that'll clean that up. One thing you want to be careful of is if you do this too hard, then you'll make like very obvious lines on the edge of the plastic, so then when you paint it, instead of this part being totally rounded all around the edge, it's gonna have like lined levels. So just be careful about that. Don't do this a whole lot. It's a bad habit to get into. It's a habit that I have, that I do quite a bit, but you really shouldn't do that. But anyway, that is one way to deal with flash. Another thing that I want to skip ahead a little bit to show you guys is these. Now this is the antenna that's going to go on the head, and as you can see on the tip there are these little rectangular parts, and those are called flags. Some other people might call them something different, I don't know. I've always called them flags. Anyway, these you'll often see on a lot of high-grade kits, especially on Gundam kits. On the V-fin, they often have this kind of flag there. Of course, this doesn't have a V-fin, it has this part instead. So those tips are supposed to be pointed, but just due to child safety, Bandai puts this little thing on there just to make them not quite so pointed. But we want to make our kit look good and not like a toy, so we want to get rid of those. It's pretty simple to do, and like everything, there's a few ways to do it. Usually how I do it is I cut a little bit off just with the trimmer, nippers, clippers, whatever. I just cut a little bit off just to get it a little bit closer. And there usually is always a line. Because it's yellow, I'm not sure how well you can see. There's a line of where the flag is and where just the normal part should be. So I just want to cut it a little bit closer to the line. Like that. And then you can either take your sandpaper or your knife, and this one's still got quite a bit on there, so I'm just going to go at it a little bit with the knife first and just try to get that more pointed. Now, because this part is very, very small, obviously you have to be very careful not to break it, so just tread very lightly when working with these parts. Nobody likes a broken V-fin. So now that I've got that sanded, you can see that those tips are nice and sharp and straight. It looks much, much better. Okay, and the last thing I want to point out is mold lines. Now, seam lines are the line that appears when two parts sandwich together and then you've got a line in between. And flash is what occurs around the edge of a part. Mold lines will appear basically, they're basically similar to flash, where it's just a little bit of a line of plastic where the plates of the mold fit together and they're just created a little bit of a line there. So I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see it on this part, but here along the side of the tube there is a little bit of a mold line. So when we go to paint that, it's going to have a small line running along here, and that just doesn't look good because these are supposed to be separate metal parts in this chain. So once again, depending on where the mold line is on the part, if it's on a large flat section, usually going at it with one of these is pretty good. In this case, it's along this piping section. So once again, we can go ahead and just hit that with a little bit of sandpaper, like so. But this is an area where you want to be extra careful because these parts are supposed to be round, so if you sand them too much, you're going to make one flat side on one side, and then that's just going to ruin the look of your piping. But if we just sand that just a little bit, then once again, don't know how well you can see that, but then we've just got rid of that line on the edge of there. So back to the building, one thing you can do to kind of save some time and make your life a little bit easier is rather than doing each step separately like what we've been doing, like cutting just these parts for step 1 and doing step 1, then cutting just these couple parts for step 2 and doing step 2, instead of like that, usually what I'll do is cut all the parts I need for a few different steps. So for example, I might cut all the parts I need for all these sections just here, step 1 through 4, so then I can just build all those. It saves some time from having to go to your runners, then cut and clean the parts, and then go back to your runners again, and then cut and clean the parts, and going back to the runners again. It just saves a lot of time to just cut all the parts you need for one section and build that. Of course, if you're just getting started, I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend taking it slow and doing it carefully. But just as someone who's built plenty of kits in my day, I can do that without any confusion of mixing parts up or anything like that. If it is a section that requires you to build, for example, the left leg first and then the right leg next because the parts are totally different, then I do recommend sticking with that and just building just the right leg first and then the left leg, unless you feel really comfortable cutting the parts out and keeping them separate without getting them mixed. Anyway, that's basically all there is to it. Let's just go ahead and build this guy. And one last thing I want to warn you guys on is just to be wary of how you're going to have to take apart kits to paint them. So basically what I mean is that you're going to want to paint this cockpit hatch piece a different color than the rest of the body. So when we press this piece onto there, it's going to be really hard to take it back off again. So just keep that in mind when you're pressing stuff together. With this particular part, it wouldn't be too hard because I can press it all the way in, and then if I need to get it out, I can kind of wiggle it out from the top, and I should just be able to pull it off like that. There are other ways to get it off if I couldn't just take it off, but it's just something that you want to be careful of. So actually what I'm going to do is step ahead a little bit. This is something I was going to save for a little bit later in the series, but I guess I'll just go ahead and show it to you guys now. One way to make sure that you can stick parts together and pull them apart again easily is to actually cut the pegs a little bit. Not cut the pegs all the way, but you want to cut just a little bit, just so there's not quite as much friction holding those parts together. Now these pegs are very, very small already, so I do have to kind of be really careful not to cut them totally off. Although cutting them off wouldn't really be all that bad, it just means that I wouldn't be able to put this back on without gluing it. If I was not doing this video series, that wouldn't really be a big problem because I can just paint the parts separately and then just glue it in when it's painted. But because I want to be able to show you guys what the kit looks like just all snapped up together before we paint it, I want to be able to take this on and off. So basically what you have to do is cut the peg a little bit just at an angle. So that's going to basically be something like this. I just want to cut just a little bit of that peg off like that. So now there's still a little bit of a peg there, but you can see it's just a little bit of an angle, and that's basically it. And this other one, I'm going to do the same thing. Just cut a little bit off the top like that. Now I should be able to, I can still put this on there like that and it'll stay, but it's going to be much easier, I think, to take off like that. This same method is also very helpful for like arm or leg pieces, especially on high grades where it's just two pieces that are just sandwiched together. Oftentimes those pieces will make it difficult to paint certain parts, or just for getting rid of seam lines, or just test fitting everything. It's going to be a really helpful technique for you guys. Just make sure you don't cut off too much of the peg. And remember, if you make mistakes, you can always fix it. If you cut off too much of the peg, or if you break a peg, you can always fix it with glue. and you won't really end up hurting anything. So now I've got the torso all snapped together, and I'm going to go ahead and build the rest of the kit. I'm not going to do any of that on video because I think you guys get the idea. But once again, as I'm sure there's been some things that I've missed, please guys feel free to ask any questions that you have below, either to me here on YouTube or on Instagram or on Facebook or anywhere. And not just me, any people in the community, especially there's a lot of other guys that are much more experienced and much more skilled than me. Feel free to ask any of us questions at any time. We're always willing to help you guys. And like I said before, don't be afraid of making mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to damage your parts by cutting them incorrectly or gouging them with knives or sanding too much. It happens to me all the time, and I've been building kits for years. It just happens, and there's always ways to fix that stuff, so just don't worry too much about it. We're going to cover a whole lot more in future videos. The next video, we're going to take a look at what the kit looks like all put together. We're going to talk about how we're going to go about doing some modifications to the kit, and we're going to talk about how to get rid of those nasty seam lines. Luckily, this kit doesn't really have a whole lot of seam lines to get rid of, but there are a few, and we'll go over how to get rid of those. Anyway, thanks guys for watching. Leave your questions and comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.